Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks for joining me this morning, but it's my morning and your evening. Tell us where you are in the world.
Yeah, so I'm based in Amsterdam at the moment.
Amsterdam. I had an aunt who lived there for a while, and I am dying to go. I hear it's very beautiful there.
It is one of the most stunning cities I've ever lived in. I mean, I still
Wow.
walk outside my house and see the canals on a beautiful day, and
Yeah.
it sometimes takes my breath away where I have to stop and take a photo in my own city. But
Wow.
that's just to kind of caveat that that's on a beautiful day, and there are many gloomy, rainy, gray days where it's miserable. So
Yeah.
Um, I
Oh,
don't want to
that's
give
life.
anybody the false impression that it's like this year round, but today is a gorgeous day.
Well, there's other things that are very attractive about it too, the architecture and the people, and there's all kinds of other things too, besides the clouds or lack thereof.
Yeah, for me, the bicycle culture is what really draws me to it.
Yeah, that is super cool. Yeah, we have plans to go back to Europe next year. So Amsterdam is definitely on the list. But we're not here to talk about Amsterdam. We're here to talk about a very exciting topic of porn addiction. It's something that I've only have had people come on to talk about twice before. And I found it so educational and enlightening. And to me, it was just like another reminder that, addiction will manifest in many different forms and that the underlying causes are typically all the same, self avoidance and emotional pain and all that. And we'll get to that. But first, I would like to play a little game I call the lightning round, which you seem like you're so up for. So I was so excited for that. So I like to start. I see that you have lots of books in your background. If you're not watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, Jeremy has a bunch of books behind him. So did you have a favorite book that helped you on your journey of recovery?
Yeah, I would say that there is one that I can point to that was kind of a turning point for everything, and it's a book called Happiness by Mathieu Ricard. So like Mathieu, like a French version of Matthew.
Oh, thank you. I
Ricard.
was like, how do you spell that? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's called Happiness, A Guide to Life's Most Important Skill, I think is the subtitle. And it's written from this French uh, Tibetan monk. So he was born in France, was doing a PhD program at the Pasteur Institute in molecular biology, and then in while he was in his PhD program, he started traveling to India and to kind of the Tibetan government area and learned about meditation and decided to leave his science background and become a monk. And he's been a monk for the last 40 years. And what is beautiful about him is so his father was a very famous French philosopher. He has a background in science and also many decades of very intensive meditation training. And so he brings all three of these together in a beautiful way, philosophy, science, and spirituality. And that book was the first book to really bring, for me, I had always been an atheist, always been very allergic to spirituality. And then when I read this book, it made me realize that meditation, in particular, like Buddhist meditation, is very much a pragmatic way of training the mind to be healthier, to have
Yeah.
more wholesome qualities like contentment and gratitude and appreciation, and to start to disentangle the mind or kind of uproot some of these unhealthy or unskillful qualities like
Mhm.
craving, avoidance, self judgment, all the things that maybe get us into trouble. These are just habit patterns of the mind. And this book was like, hey, if you want to be happy, look at what your mind is doing and
Yeah.
cultivate the mental qualities that lead to happiness and start to, de strengthen the mental qualities that lead to suffering.
Yeah.
And that's the recipe for happiness. And it also introduced to me the concept of neuroplasticity, which is
Yeah.
really important, particularly for the addiction we're going to be talking about today around porn addiction. A lot of it is around, hardwiring the mind in these different ways that end up over time becoming addictions. Um, so that book really changed my life and pointed me in a direction towards real happiness as opposed to temporary pleasure and satisfaction, which is what I had been going for. I just before I thought, okay, if I have more sex, have more success, more fame, more pleasure, that will make me happy. That was my
Mhm.
strategy.
Yeah. That's most
And
people's strategy.
yeah, and it doesn't provide lasting happiness.
Yeah.
So that book was really a turning point for me.
That sounds beautiful. Thank you for such an eloquent description of this book. I'm totally gonna buy it now. Add it to my catalog of 183. I hope it's on audiobook.
It is. Yeah.
But man, I mean, you hit on all the things, right? The craving, avoidance, and self-judgment. Oof. Those are all the recipes for disaster. But conversely, all the you're so funny, allergic to spirituality. We're gonna get to it as because I do believe you have monk in your history.
Hmm.
So we'll talk about how we can reconcile that. But thank you for the book recommendation. I'm totally gonna get it. Do you have I love quotes and mantras is, one day at a time, something that I live by that has saved me. Do you have something like that is sort of like a guiding principle in your life?
Well, there's a couple that come to mind when you just said that. There's maybe two that come to mind. One is from comes from the Buddha, and it was what you frequently think and ponder upon becomes the inclination of the mind. So this is a
Oh,
quote
so good.
2,500 years ago. It's like a long time ago they realized that what you're constantly doing with your mind becomes the inclination of the mind. And
Mm-hmm.
this is essentially what neuroplasticity is. It's
Yeah.
neurons that fire together, wire
Wear it
together.
together.
And it
Yeah.
was that understanding that made me realize, like, oh, if I'm watching porn on a daily basis, this is hardwiring this craving into this, objectification, sexualization, all this kind of stuff that is causing suffering, that I'm creating these pathways in my mind.
Right.
So that's one quote that really was pivotal for me. The other one was less direct about this, but I think it was by some rabbi. And it's been a long time since I've said it, so I'm just going to try to remember it as I say it. But it was something along the lines of when I was younger, I used to admire intelligent people. And as I grow older, I admire kind people, something along those lines.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
really spoke to me because I remember when I was younger, I was like, I need to be the most intelligent. I need to be the
Yeah.
most. And then it's like, as I grow older and as I grow wiser, it's like, no, what I really admire is kind people.
Yeah. Wow, that one hit me deep. I agree. I used to the things that we admire, changes over time. Yeah, and kindness. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing those. I love those. What's one thing you wish you would have known when you started on your journey of recovery? Like if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you say?
You're not alone, I think
Mm,
is the most important lesson that I've learned. It's like, because, part of my story, which we can get into this, but so I recognized that I was addicted to porn and started going on the path of healing that addiction and was successful at it. I eventually broke free and stopped watching porn, and that addiction was no longer in my life. But even from the point of when I stopped watching, it took me another 6 years before I could open up to a single person about it, before I could
mm,
even mention the fact, because there was still so much shame around it, feeling like this was this secret, this dirty secret that I couldn't tell
yeah.
people. And now realizing it's like, oh, this is something that affects so many people.
Hmm.
And I'm not alone. I'm not, broken because I have this thing in my past. I'm not a bad person. Just that recognition that no matter what you're going through, whether it's this kind of addiction or that kind of addiction, whether it's fear or sadness or anxiety, it's like you're not alone,
Yeah.
and you can open up and be vulnerable. And I really wish I knew that much younger, that it was okay for me to open up and seek help and be vulnerable.
Yeah. 6 years is a long time in the desert, as they would say.
Hmm.
Um, no, but I love that when you're not alone. I remember when I first got sober, hearing people say things out loud that I had been thinking. I was shocked. It was shocking. It was like this, oh my God. It was like a drink of water in the desert. You know, it was an oasis in the desert of like, oh my gosh. It was such a relief to know that I wasn't, maybe I was the freak that I thought I was, but there were many other freaks just like me. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah. Let's get into your story. Let's talk about, and we could define terms at some point because I think it's confusing. Like maybe I should just speak for myself because I think it's normal. I think pornography is normal to some extent. I don't know what, you know, how you define normal or whatever, but maybe we can talk about, you know, when it becomes, you know, problematic in terms of, you mentioned objectification and just sort of like that, you know, getting caught in that desire and in the emptiness that comes from that. Um, and this is a I was telling you earlier that the first episode that I did on porn addiction, I was scolded for not being more educated. So I'll just be right up front and saying this is the education of Arlena. So yeah, just I'm curious though to start kind of with like family of origin stuff because I feel like childhood always sets the stage for later. So however you feel like telling the story.
Yeah, you know, I didn't have any like huge trauma in my childhood. It like trauma with a capital T. You know, we all
Right.
have lowercase t trauma of certain needs not being met or being teased at school or you know just all the little things that cause us to feel pain as children. And for whatever reason, you know, the thing that I found that helped me soothe all the little pains that I was going through was porn. And even when I was very young, you know, it was like looking at the attractive superheroes in my comic books, looking at the lingerie catalogs. You know, it's just that kind of that was my escape, and it was a way of soothing myself and giving myself some escape, some pleasure. Um, and over time, it grew, you know, to become a daily habit into high school. And by the time I got to college, when we had internet, um, and when I got to college, I was watching every night for 2 or 3 hours. You know, it was every night I would go into my room, lock the door, and start browsing. And you mentioned this question of like, or this, I guess this belief like, okay, porn is normal, and at one point, does it become an addiction? And I will say for the record, you know, there are kind of two camps in the world that I work in, which the porn addiction recovery world. There's the camp that comes from a more religious background that says porn is sinful and you know you should not touch it. It is of the devil and this kind of stuff.
All right.
And that's not the camp that I'm in. I'm in the camp of like, hey, we're sexual beings. Sexuality is beautiful, but learn how to like have a healthy relationship to your sexuality. And there might be a point at which the things that you're watching and the amount that you're watching is unhealthy. And it might be having a negative impact on your relationships, on your self worth, on your partner's self worth. You know, there's a lot of ways that porn can impact us if we're not mindful. And so, you know, my whole thing is like, there's nothing inherently evil about porn. I mean, there is a conversation to be had about the connection between the porn industry and the sex trafficking industry, and the connection
Yeah.
between the
Yeah.
porn industry and non-consensual sex, non-consensual release of videos. And those are very real conversations. You know, there's some studies that show that you really just don't know what you're watching. You might think that you're watching consensual sex, and it could be that you're watching trafficked women, you know, being abused, and you just do not have you just can't tell based on the videos that you're watching whether or not these women are actually doing it willingly. um, so there's a lot of conversations to be had about that, but kind of on principle, you know, the idea of watching somebody else have sex on a screen, I'm not going to say this is evil or sinful. But I think for a lot of people it starts to impact their life in ways that don't they're not aware of. You know, it impacts their expectations of their partner, their feelings of what healthy intimacy is, and you know what sexuality is, and and also just the ways that it screws with us on a physiological basis, like on our, dopamine networks and our ability to take joy in kind of the simple pleasures in life. And this is, addiction on a general level. It's not just about porn, it's social media
Right.
addiction, YouTube addiction, anything. Um, so I realize I'm getting a little bit off track. I
No,
can
you're
kind of go
I'm
back to
actually
my,
no,
yeah,
I'm actually tracking because you're hitting on all the things that I wanted to know about. So yeah, please continue. You're doing great.
yeah. So I guess, your question was, what is my own origin story about this? And, for me, it was a harmless, relatively harmless in the beginning. It was like, oh, okay, these pictures in the lingerie catalog are, pleasing to my eyes. Like, oh, let me look at that more often. Let me fantasize. Um, and it just grew and grew to the point where when I was in college, it was every night, a few hours. And I was starting to notice the impact of that habit on my day-to-day life. I was noticing the way that it was affecting how I was interacting with women, my just my focus and attention and my ability to go deeply into hobbies and my studies and all of these other things. Um, and also my ability to just be happy in life because I was constantly thinking about what I didn't have. I'd
Mm.
walk into a room and just kind of already be scanning on like, okay, who can I check out? Who can I look at and check out and objectify? And it was very hard to actually appreciate the good things that were going on in my life. So there's a lot of different ways that it was starting to affect me, and I realized, hey, this is something that I don't want to keep doing.
So that was that in college when you kind of came to that place of I don't like how this is affecting me. It was
Yeah,
college. That's pretty young. And you know, I have two, children, two boys, well, men. One's gonna be 23 and one's nine, almost 20. And I am very concerned about this younger generation who has so much access. And quite frankly, they've had access for longer than I care to admit, And even when I was young, I was exposed to pornography when I was probably in elementary school or maybe even, yeah, elementary school, which is so young. Um, and I worry for especially the young men who have grown up in this climate of access to some, like it worries me that they're not actually driven to go out of the house and like they don't leave. I'm not going to say who, but I have somebody in my world whose son has not developed any social skills, never leaves the house, and his mother is very concerned. And I'm like, that boy has all his needs met in his room. He doesn't need to leave. Like he doesn't have all his needs met, but you know what I mean. And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
worry
He's
for this.
getting the
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I remember back in the day. So funny story. Sorry, I'm talking so much, but I just have to share that I have this. I received my father's journal when he was about 22 years old, when he was in the military in Japan. My dad was out in the world and like meeting women and he was kind of driven to go find a partner. And that's not the case with this younger generation. Like they don't have to, they're not motivated. They're just not motivated. So I wonder what is, how it affects having like number one, just the desire to go out into the world and meet people and kind of what it's doing to that younger generation. What do you think about that?
I mean, 100%. You really nailed one of the issues with it is that it is a risk-free, rejection-free source
Right.
of feeling like you're getting your intimacy needs met, but you're not. It's
Yeah.
like you're not getting your actual needs met. It's like drinking salt water in a desert, right? It's like you're not actually quenching your thirst. You're making it worse. But the thing is people, it's easy. You can get whatever you want. You're in complete control. You get your 10 out of 10 perfect image of a woman. If you want 6 foot tall blonde woman with double D breasts, that's what you can get. And you don't have to worry about rejection or anything. And So that's one of the things is it does decrease people's motivation to actually go out there and meet people in real life and learn how to take risks and learn how to be comfortable with rejection. I would say that on the grand scale, that's an even smaller issue to another issue that I see, which is if you think about these young kids getting access to modern hardcore internet pornography, imagine a 10-year-old boy logging on and having access to Pornhub. And 95% of the stuff on the homepage of Pornhub is demeaning and degrading towards women. It's violent
Right.
because the thing is, it's an industry, and whatever's the most captivating of people's attention, that's what gets created. And so this is why
Oh,
you're seeing almost every video there's, choking, anal, like all the stuff that is, it's okay if you have two consensual adults who know what they're getting into and they know what their own things, what their kinks are. But when you have a 10-year-old kid who doesn't know, and this is 90% of what they're seeing, they think, oh, this is healthy intimacy. This is what normal sex looks like.
and that's the
And so
starting point.
that's the starting point. And that's, the choking and slapping and anal is like just the kind of, it gets way more extreme, way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, and you're also getting young 10-year-old girls watching this. And so
Oh,
young girls are thinking, oh, this is what I need to be doing. This is what's expected of me.
oh my
I'm supposed
God.
to like this. And it gets even worse. In not a single porn video that I've ever seen has a girl said no to an advance, and that has been respected. And so, again, what's the message that young girls are getting is that they're not allowed to say no. They always need to be in the mood. And young boys are thinking this too, like, oh, girls never say no. They're always in the mood for sex. They're always in the mood to be choked or slapped or called a slut. And so they think if a girl does say no, that they're doing something wrong.
Right.
Right. And so it's just all the ways that this influences us on a subtle level. Because again, it's not just like something you watch once every 2 years. For many people, it's a nightly, daily habit. And
Yeah.
so the impact of, even if you think you're different and you think, hey, I know this is a fantasy, this isn't going to affect me, you're hardwiring these expectations into your mind.
Yeah.
And so this is, we're seeing a lot of kind of stuff coming up with middle schoolers and high schoolers where, you know, things are, young boys are saying, hey, what happens if I'm choking my girlfriend and she is unconscious? Like, so all kinds of like,
Oh my
and again,
God.
it's like, I don't want to demonize kinks, right? It's like, there's
Right. No,
nothing
I don't
wrong
feel like
with,
that's what we're talking about.
right. But it's like, it's understanding that people don't have the young kids especially don't have the discernment to know, hey, is this, you know, what normal sex is this a kink, is this a fantasy? Because also, it's just kind of the unrealistic expectations, because porn again is like, you have people who are, all the male porn stars are on all kinds of Viagra and everything, all the female porn stars are 18 and 19-year-old girls with fit bodies and breast implants and
Surgically altered. Yeah.
yeah. And so again, it's just like the unrealistic expectations that we're giving people and giving ourselves, when we engage in it. There's so many ways, to
Yeah.
look at this.
Yeah. And, in terms of like starting point too, it's like I remember when I was really young, the first kiss would make your heart race, right? The idea of this person that somebody likes me and I like them and we're going to kiss and that's going to make my heart race to these kids that are being I mean when you're talking about choking and anal and all the other things, it's like I mean that's spicy, but to start out that way, it's like where do you go from there?
And
Where do
this
you go
is,
from
with
there?
addiction,
Yeah.
habituation, it's like this is one of the core characteristics of addiction is you need more and more
Right.
to
More
get the same
extreme
hit.
and
So
more extreme.
yeah. And so with drugs, it's like, okay, let me take a higher dose. But with porn, it's like, okay, let me have a more extreme thing because now I'm bored of vanilla sex. Now I'm
Yeah.
bored of choking. So I need something more extreme. And so you see people escalating, and they get into
Yeah.
more and more extreme or riskier and riskier things because it's also, if they're getting into something that's maybe unethical or whatever, it's like, oh, that taboo thing also feels more exciting.
Right.
And so,
Man, that leads to so many dangers on so many levels.
exactly.
I heard a statistic. I don't know if it's a statistic or as so much as a statement of fact that the US is the number one consumer of child pornography. And it makes sense to me that if kids are starting out in junior high, elementary school, junior high, they're starting out with the extreme forms. It kind of makes sense how, you know, why things become so deviant later on in life
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
extremes. Like your body just literally does not respond in the way that it used to.
Yeah. And this is,
Repeating.
even if it's like, for the people listening to this, it doesn't even have to get that bad where it's like, okay, you're getting into child porn or bestiality. It can just be like, hey, I'm getting to the point where my body only knows how to respond to porn and it doesn't know how to respond to real life sex with my partner. And this is
Right.
why we see one of the common um, kind of consequences of porn addiction is erectile dysfunction. So, for example, something like
Oh.
delayed ejaculation, where men actually can't get hard when they're with their partner because they're so used to, getting aroused from these extreme things that they're watching. It might just be
Yeah.
not even that extreme, just they're so used to online internet porn that
Hmm.
when they're in their real kind of environment with a real life partner, they can't actually perform.
They can't perform, they can't climax. It's just not, and it's awkward and uncomfortable. And so I would imagine that is even less of an incentive to nurture personal
Exactly.
relationships.
And so
Yeah.
then there's the like shame, like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. So let me just watch porn, which is again a downward spiral.
Okay, so I'm getting the picture that's maybe there maybe there is no healthy. That's like an occasional drink to an alcoholic. Maybe it's not a thing. I don't know.
Well, and here's the thing, it's so for example, with alcohol, some people can have a healthy relationship with alcohol, right?
That's
And
true. Yeah.
some people can have a healthy relationship to porn. That's
Yeah.
definitely possible. The question, and this is why my whole kind of philosophy is self-awareness. You
Yeah.
have, and the big issue is that with porn, many of the consequences are subtle and downstream. So if you are
Mm.
addicted to heroin, it's like you see the consequences, right? If you're addicted
Immediately.
to alcohol, you feel the hangover.
Hmm.
With porn, many of these consequences, they're things that build up over time because they're acting on the longer time scale of
Mm.
dopamine systems, neurological pathways, expectations of intimacy and relationships. And so it's not the same as like you wake up with a hangover and you're like, oh, this is because of all the drinking I did last night. These are
Mm.
things that build up slowly over time. And in particular, so many men and women start watching porn when they're so young that they don't know what it's like to be without porn. And so it's very hard to make the link like, oh, hey, these problems in my relationships are because of porn because they don't know any different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you kind of need the contrast, right? You kind of need the contrast of before when you're kind of the clean slate to know what normal is. Yeah, and that's the idea. Like normal is such a vague, it's kind of a useless term, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
There's the before and after, the before exposure and after exposure. It's a very different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we shift gears a little bit? I'm so curious
Yeah.
about the you're like, bring it on. I told you we were gonna be all over the place today. Um, so I'm curious about you mentioned that, when we talked before that you grew up in a religious household and that you were always atheist. Can you kind of share what that was like for you?
Yeah. I mean, my parents divorced when I was 3. My dad is very religious. My mom, not religious, atheist, scientist. And so on my dad's side, I was, asked to go to church and believe in God. I went to Jesus camp kind of thing. But,
Fame.
as far as I can remember, I never believed, I was never a believer. And so it just never landed with me. And I
You
also,
never felt moved by the spirit, not even at Jesus
no,
camp.
no. Um, And on the
That's a whole
contrary,
nother
like
high, by the way.
yeah,
That's all
yeah, that
that's
high,
if you can tap into that shit, that's some good shit.
yeah.
Sponsored by your family.
Where's your dealer on that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the religious thing never spoke to me, and on the
Okay.
contrary, like it really annoyed me, like dogma, not being able to question, having to have faith
Right.
in things, because for
Unquestioning
me,
faith. Yeah.
science, yeah, like I was like, no, that's like you should be able to question things, and things should make sense, and there should be a reason why you believe it. And it never, especially Nate, didn't make sense to me. It's like, yeah, okay, you believe that your book is the word of God, but this other religion thinks that their book is the word of God too. It's like, well, who are you to say that theirs isn't and yours is?
Well,
Didn't
it
make sense.
depends on where you land on the planet.
Exactly. But there was just
You
like
just
the
happen to
reason.
land, you landed on in Christian land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, so I grew up kind of with that background, but always feeling very much like an atheist.
That's
And
amazing that
so
you were able to maintain sort of your autonomy in the midst of that kind of pressure. But do you think it was because your
yeah,
mom was atheist?
possibly,
How did your mom?
that
Okay,
probably.
sorry to interrupt you, but how did your mom and dad get together? That is crazy.
Yeah, so when they were together, she was a Christian.
Oh,
And
okay.
then kind of her leaving him and also leaving the church happened simultaneously. She was
Got
like,
it.
"Oh, this isn't like this religion doesn't make sense. Like there's a lot of stuff here that doesn't make sense, and also this marriage isn't working out for me." So she
Got
left
it.
everything, and a beautiful story. She was a single mom, 3 kids, went back to school, ended up becoming a tenured research professor at UC Berkeley. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That's very
she's got a
Where are
cool
you in the
story.
lineup of three kids?
I am. I have an older sister and a twin sister, so I'm in the middle with two sisters, one older and one just younger, 7 minutes younger.
Same. Same with you.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay. So I totally interrupted you. So you have this mom who is a scientist and a dad who is religious and but you were raised by your mom.
Yeah, mostly.
Okay. And that was more in line with your authentic self of things needing to
Yeah.
make sense and we laugh. So it's so funny because I grew up pretty religious too, but my dad was also he was uber religious. We have 400 years of ministers on my daddy's side. Yeah. Your face. And my mom was born and raised in Mexico City, Catholic, but she was like, nah. She was
Uh-huh.
she was like, no, thank you for for the majority of her life. And I had one of those moments where um I was so worried for my mother's soul because I was taught that something bad would happen to her if she didn't believe in a specific way. And I used to think, well, God must love my mother. I was getting these messages that my puny human brain couldn't fathom the vastness of God's love. Yet, if she didn't believe this specific way, she was going to burn in hell.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
like quite literally. And I was like, well, God must love my mom at least as much as I do. I would never let that happen. So I say all that to say I understand. I struggled that there was a lot of things about the spirituality that I would get high off of too. This idea of um, a benevolent being who cared about what happened to me and had the power to help me do stuff I couldn't do on my own. So it was a very confusing time for me.
Mm.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had sort of well, it didn't sound like you had a similar experience. You were very clear from the beginning.
Yeah. I was always just like, nah, this isn't for me.
That's so amazing. Okay, so I'm curious to know how that line sort of developed over time because you mentioned that at some point you have monk in your history. How does that work?
Yeah. So when I had this realization in college that, hey, I'm addicted to porn, this is kind of ruining my life. Eh, the one of the phrases that came into my mind when I had this recognition is like, hey, I'm a slave to my lust. I really felt
Mm,
like I was a slave to my desires and my lust, and it would hijack my mind. And that was a really terrifying thing. And the other thing that happened is when I had this realization, I saw where I was headed, and I was like, hey, if I don't change the way I'm living, I'm going to end up some perverted old 70-year-old trying to pick up girls at bars. And so that really made me want to change what I was doing. And so I started looking into everything I could on kind of, so I guess the bigger picture here was I realized I would never be happy if I didn't change the way I was living, because
Oh, okay.
my life was very good externally. I was doing amazing in school. I had, lots of friends and romances. I was captain of a sports team. Things were great on the outside, but inside I was always miserable and always wanting more and never satisfied with what I had. So that got me interested in these books on, okay, what is real happiness all about? What does it mean to feel actually fulfilled and content in your life? And so that got me into this book, Happiness, that I mentioned earlier. And
Yeah.
in that book, they talked about meditation. And it finally made sense from a scientific perspective. It was like, hey, meditation is a way to rewire your mind. You're training your mind through neuroplasticity. So I ended up traveling to India and started doing these meditation retreats. And those just totally changed my life. It gave me a path to walk on to start to heal my addiction. And so it became such an important part of my life that I essentially went on a silent meditation retreat twice a year. And so I ended up doing many of these silent retreats, which are anywhere from 5 days to a month, where you're not reading, you're not writing, you're not talking, you're not making eye contact with other participants. You're just meditating in every moment. Um,
Can I just tell
and
you that
so
sounds terrifying to me?
it's horrible. It is
It
terrifying.
is horrible.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, it's miserable.
It's miserable. Well, why would you do so? You didn't start out doing a month long silent
No,
retreat,
my first one was 10 days.
10 days, and that was really hard.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. No reading either.
No reading, no journaling,
What
no
do you
reading.
do?
You're just with yourself. So
Like,
you're
can you go for walks?
not really. So in some of them you can kind of, but in other traditions they kind of advise to not. It depends on the nature of the walk. So you'll do, in some of them you do walking
Walking
meditation, but you
meditation.
pick
Yeah.
you pick a 20-foot path and you literally just go from point A to point B to point A to point B. You're not going for a stroll to distract yourself. You're feeling your right foot and then you're feeling your left foot, and then you get to the end and you turn around and you do the same thing. And it's miserable, but it's miserable on purpose, because part of the dilemma that we all face is that we're constantly running away from pain and running towards pleasure. And we don't know how to be with anything uncomfortable. And the moment we see something pleasant, we grasp after it and say, I need this. I need more of this, right? A cookie, I need it.
My
Sex,
phone.
porn, I need it. My phone, I need it.
Yeah.
Gratification from LinkedIn and Instagram, a like, I need it. Give me more, right? And so part of the process is learning how to actually be with discomfort and not run away from it. And so when you sit there in meditation and you have nothing to distract you, when a pain in your body comes up, you just sit there and say, oh, okay, this is painful. It's unpleasant. Let me be here with it. And you're cultivating this mental quality of, we call it equanimity. You can call it resilience. You can call it whatever you want. It's learning how to be with something unpleasant without running away. And this is critical to addiction recovery, which
Mm-hmm.
is like when shame comes up, when sadness comes up, can you sit with it instead of reaching for the thing that's going to take you away from it? But in order to sit with it, you need to develop that skill of being with discomfort.
No, that's man. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I really love this book from Tara Brach, Radical Acceptance. And she's
Yeah.
huge. Yeah, she's
So
probably.
that's the lineage that I practice in. So it's insight
Ah,
meditation or vipassana. So
yeah.
like those, the retreats that she leads are the retreats that I was going on. So that
Did
whole
you go on her
system,
retreat?
I've never sat with Tara Brach herself, but like that lineage that she's
Yeah, a
in,
whole flavor of
yeah,
yeah,
we call it
yeah.
insight meditation.
Insight meditation. No, I love her. I'm obsessed with her rain meditation. I recommend it literally all the time.
Okay, so this is funny.
Like,
So this is gonna get real geeky on
bring
insight
it
meditation
on.
meditation.
Bring it on.
Um, but it's also it's like geeky from a scholastic level. The rain technique was actually developed by my teacher, Michelle McDonald, who's been teaching Vipassana insight meditation for 40 years. Tara Brach, like, has been using that technique, and she will, sometimes she'll be like, yes, this was developed by Michelle McDonald.
Yeah, I've heard her say that she did not invent it, but she
Yeah,
popularized it for sure.
exactly. And so everybody credits it to her, but like
Oh, and I
part
just
of
did
me is
that
like,
too.
yeah, but everybody, because the thing is, Tara Brach is famous. Michelle McDonald is not a famous public meditation
Right,
teacher.
right.
She's been doing it in the background for decades.
40
Um,
years. Wow.
yeah, over 40 years. So
Yeah.
she's like an OG teacher in this tradition. And she developed this practice, and then Tara Brach kind of took it and slightly modified it a little bit to her own kind of suiting in different ways.
We should probably explain what rain stands for. Do you want to kind of get into it?
Sure. Yeah, so it's a technique for, practicing mindfulness or dealing with something difficult in the moment. It's an acronym, so RAIN. The R, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. So I'll say one of them, but the R is recognize.
Mhm.
So you recognize what's going on. So you might pause and say, "Oh, okay, this is sadness. Oh, sadness is here." The A is acceptance. And so you make space for the feeling and say, "Okay, sadness is here. I don't need to push it away. I don't need to run away from it." The I is to investigate. And this is where you get curious about, okay, what does this feel like in my body? Like, what is sadness actually? Oh, yeah, it feels heavy. Maybe my chest feels tight. Maybe it feels empty. But you're really exploring what the experience is like. And then the N, there's kind of a couple ways. The original way of N was non-identification, where you say,
Oh,
okay,
good to
this
know.
is, yeah. So, and this is the original rain, was to not identify with it. It's like, oh, this
Mhm.
is, this is not me. This is an experience passing through me.
Um,
But you can also do nurturing. So kind of sending some compassion, some kindness to the feeling. So nurturing can also be the N. There's no right or wrong way to do it. They're both helpful, just in different ways.
mhm.
But
It
it's
just,
the rain technique is just a way of bringing more mindfulness to whatever you're experiencing.
yeah. I typically get, so I get confused sometimes about the difference between recognizing it and allowing it. Um, like the other day, money stuff to this day will occasionally, I grew up poor, so money stuff will occasionally trigger me. And I was like, oh, okay, let me see if I can do this rain. It's recognized. It's like, oh, there's like I'm all a hot mess on the inside. I recognize I'm dysregulated. I was like, okay. And it's so funny because even now, like if I'm dysregulated, it's hard for me to access the information that I know unless I'm in the habit of practicing it, because it's that idea that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And so I've been training myself for years to, do kind of this process to check in and become regulated. So I recognize, oh, I'm feeling this kind of way. And so I'm recognizing that I don't feel good. And then allowing it. It's like that's when I started naming it. I was like, oh, I feel frustration. I feel scared. I feel okay, scared is here. Frustration is here. And I just say it out loud and I go, is that what it is? And then it kind of mutates as I talk about it. Has that ever happened to you where you like the
Yeah, I
feeling it's
mean,
still, yeah,
in any given moment, there's a multitude of things going on. So,
yeah,
there might be some fear, and then it might turn into confusion, and then it might turn into anger. And it's like these can all be there simultaneously. And
right.
so you can never really capture all of them. It's just kind of, okay, what's predominant here? Like, oh, is it
That's
fear?
predominant.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
the allowing or the accepting part, it's not so much about the naming it, it's about the orientation that we have to it. It's
Mm-hmm.
about kind of how are we relating to it, whatever it is.
Oh,
is there kind of this very subtle judging it or pushing it away, like, oh, like fear is here, and oh, this fear
I
is
don't
here
like
again, darn it, it's like I don't like fear, like if I
it.
was a
Darn
better
it.
meditator, I wouldn't
Oh,
have
yeah.
fear. This is like a subtle aversion,
Yeah.
whereas acceptance or allowing it is like, oh, fear is here, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, and
That's
that's
the allowance.
okay.
Yeah,
It's okay. That, okay, that I just got a little aha. That's the difference between frustration is here and I don't want it. Got it.
exactly.
Okay, I see.
Because
I'm
that's a
picking up
thing
what
that
you're
a
putting
lot
down.
of, yeah, a lot of people will, and that's a really important point, because you can have awareness and you can
Yeah.
have recognition, but there might be a lot of judgment behind it, like,
Oh,
oh yeah,
yeah.
fear is here, oh I don't like fear, like, oh, if I
Fucking
was better
fear.
at this, I thought I'd figured this out already, you
Right.
know. But what really makes something real mindfulness is that aspect of fear is here, and that's okay.
And that's
Fear is here.
okay.
Yeah. And so that can be your mantra. Like you can recognize it and then add, and that's okay.
And that's okay. That's, yeah, that's different from the aversion to it and the
Exactly.
story. Because, man, I have many times in therapies and all this stuff recognize how quickly a story is developed behind a feeling. The feeling of, I was frustrated, and the frustration was like, oh, and they don't they don't respect my time, and they, and just it's just instant, and I don't even know what's happening, but
Yeah.
it's all with the premise under the premise of I don't want this. I don't want this
Uh-huh.
feeling. I don't want this feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see where you're going with this. So you recognize it, you allow it, and that's okay. Totally going to use that. That's cemented now. And then the investigation is really, because it really is so funny when we think about the mind body connection, when really there is no separation. People think mind is the, gray matter in your cranial vault. But the truth of the matter is that every surface, every square inch of your body is innervated with nervous tissue. So your mind and body are really one, right? They're really, like, if you took all the way the skeleton and bones and everything, there would be a silhouette of nervous tissue. So your brain is really actually in your body. I think of it as the unconscious mind. It doesn't really, it just responds. So getting curious about where it is in my body, that's like the somatic healing component that I think is often missed because we're so like locked in our head. And I wonder what you think about this. Like, there's a lot of people that have, abuse, sexual abuse, and they've learned to disassociate from their body. So it's not that they don't feel stuff in their body, they're just not, like, the awareness is so far into the subconscious mind that they're not even connected to it. So what are your thoughts, or how do you think about the sort of reattaching to sort of the emotional? That's the investigative part.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice and it's very helpful for kind of reintegrating and embodying what's going on. The other really important part of it is getting your mind into your body, like just saying, okay, where am I feeling this? It's a way of almost unhijacking your brain. Like when a strong emotion is there and you're starting to go down these stories of what does this mean about me and what do these people think? And your mind starts to spiral out of control. And by just shifting that attention of, okay, how does this feel in my body? It's almost like you're getting off the train. You're getting off the ride and saying, okay, I don't need to go down this ride of how I'm unlovable and gonna die alone and all this, stuff that the mind can take you on. And you're saying, oh, okay, fear is here.
Yeah.
Oh, fear is here, and that's okay. Like, okay, what does fear feel like? And it gives you that space to actually pause and reflect on what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. You're actually processing to resolution is kind of something that I'm kind of obsessed with, because we don't really process to resolution most times. We sort of distract, deny, suppress, and we end up carrying it, which can be very heavy. And that, I feel like that is like the carrying of the pain, the disassociated pain is what compels us to practice these compulsive behaviors. It doesn't really matter. We kind of started the conversation with porn addiction, but truth be told, it's that's just the manifestation. It can manifest in a bunch of different ways. I feel like everybody has that too. It's not just like everybody's like a little bit addicted to something under that through that lens, right? So then let's talk a little more about the nurture part. So bringing compassion. So when you identify, oh, there's fear here, it's, I always feel it in my chest or feels like a constriction, and breathing through that helps. Is that the nurturing part when you start like, oh, I'm going to bring the breath to that area or visualize like, what do you think of as nurturing? Or maybe the other angle is the non-identification. How do you think about that part?
Yeah, so the nurturing can take many different forms, but it's in any way that we kind of start to bring a little more warmth or kindness or compassion or just that flavor of, yeah, just that like healing, nurturing, warm flavor to our practice. Because without that, it's kind of helpful to compare and contrast to, okay, what would this process be without the nurturing? You could have a very cold clinical observation of what's happening, like fear. Okay, this is fear. Like fear is not me. Where is fear in my body? It's just very clinical.
Mm-hmm.
And part of this healing process, so it's a lot of the nurturing is kind of related to the allowing. It's this like making space for the experience and saying, hey, you're welcome here. You're okay to be here. I'm not going to
Yeah.
push you away or, try to get rid of you. It's like you're okay here. This, do you know the poem The Guest House by Rumi?
I was just thinking that, and I was like, God, I wish I knew that poem.
Yeah, I
Yes.
don't know it by
What's
heart,
it
but it's
called? It's
like,
called
The
it's called
Guest
the
House.
guest house.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like every new, emotion is a guest house, is a guest coming
It's a
to your
guest.
house. And it's like the sorrow, the sadness, the fear. It's like to invite each of these visitors in for tea
Yeah.
because you never know what kind of delight they're going to bring. And it's just like this act of like welcoming them in and saying, "Oh, fear, you're welcome here. Like come in, sit with me."
Yeah.
Or loneliness, or it's like whatever it is that's your trigger, because we all have different triggers. For some of us it's insecurity, for some of us it's embarrassment. It's like we feel embarrassed and we want to run away, and so we run into our addiction. For
Yeah.
some it's anger, it's like whatever it is, it's
I'm
like,
checking all those boxes.
yeah, it's like we all check all of them, but some of them might be a little bit stronger and bigger.
Yeah.
um and to make that like welcoming gesture, sometimes, in my meditations, I'll actually envision like giving a hug to this feeling,
Yeah.
like putting my arm around it. So for me, a lot of my work was around lust and this
Yeah.
feeling of lust. And it was like, oh, lust is here, go away, like push it away. And so learning how to make space for like, oh, lust. And one of the mantras that I would use in my meditation is, oh, my old friend, lust.
Mm.
And it's this like acceptance of like, hey, my old friend, lust, it's okay. I don't need to push you away. I don't need to run away from you. But I also don't need to identify with you and like believe
Ah,
the story.
yeah,
It's like, because believing the story is like, oh, lust is here. Oh, I must go, go and touch this woman. It's like, no, I don't need to believe that story. It's like, oh, it's lust. This is a feeling.
yeah. Yeah,
So the
that's beautiful.
nurturing is just that kind of warm, compassionate approach.
Yeah, I'm a very visual person, so I really appreciate the visual of welcoming them as a friend. I mean, that is so opposite, and that's one of the things we learn in recovery is to do contrary action. We all want to avoid it's this whole self-avoidance, avoidance of pain, avoidance of discomfort. And it sounds like, all the training from the silent retreats is embrace and build it. So is it kind of like building up a tolerance to it as well? You kind of build up a tolerance, you're just not afraid of it or identifying.
A little bit, but tolerance we're getting a little bit into semantics here, but they're important because tolerance
Yeah.
can almost be described as like, I can deal with this. I don't like it and I don't want it, but I'm just going to ignore it. Whereas,
Uh-huh.
like, what we're doing is, it's like real acceptance is like a warm hug. It's not like, oh, I
Yes.
can tolerate this feeling. It's like, no, it's like, I love this feeling.
Oh, love it. Ooh, that's big. That's some
Right.
next level Jedi mind trick.
And this is so, like Tarbrock's book, radical acceptance. It's
Yeah,
radical.
it
It's
is.
not like normal, like acceptance or just like okay
Tolerance.
tolerance.
Yeah.
It's radical. It's like a radical shift in like wow, oh, like this feeling is okay. I don't need
Yeah.
to get rid. I don't need to tolerate it. Like it's part of me. It's beautiful. It's here. And this is okay. This is some black belt level judo, shit is
Spiritual
like,
jujitsu.
yeah, but like all of these, this is a quote from Pema Chodron, who's another
Oh,
beautiful
love
teacher. She
her.
said, I think this is her. Somebody fact check me on this, but she says, all these pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them.
Mm.
And it's like, whatever pain you're feeling, it's a messenger trying to
To
tell
help
you where
you.
to lean in and say, hey, there's something that's wrong that you need to look at. Like if you're feeling lonely, that's a messenger saying, hey, you might need some more connection in your life, like real connection.
Real connection.
So we don't want to, and this is, one of the arguments against kind of like certain kinds of medications that make you numb out to things. It's
Right.
like even depression, it's like, hey, listen to that and saying, if you're depressed, there's a reason there. And it might be trying to tell you that something in your life is missing. Maybe it's community. Maybe it's a sense of joy. Maybe it's like something. It's like it's a messenger trying to point that something is missing
It's
and
something
to listen
missing.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah. That reminds me, I've been aware of like shadow work for some time, and shadow meaning like I have this feeling of an exiled victim in my psyche somewhere. And I had a mentor ask me one time, "Can you love your unlovable parts?" And my immediate thought was, no, no. But then, through things, learning about things like internal family systems and shadow work, it's like we all have these parts that are within us. And you can't be fully authentic and human if you hate a part of yourself, right? And we often project that onto others. And I live by this idea, if you spot it, you got it, right? Like people are just mirrors of ourselves. You can't love or hate something about somebody else unless it's something you love or hate about yourself. And so the shadow work for me has always been about identifying, like for instance, the victim mentality. Um, how can I how can I love, put my arm around and invite them in for tea and be like, what is it that you're trying to teach me? Like, how is this victim mentality serving me? And whenever I dig in to do the work, they're always trying, those different parts are always trying to help me in some way. And they typically hate the job that they have. So just
Mm-hmm.
like a side, it's like, oh, that part doesn't even like that job. So how do we love it and help it to
Yeah.
transform? But is that still a rejection of some kind? Because you're still saying, I have this victim part of me, and oh, it doesn't like the job, it wants a different job. So it doesn't want to be that anyway.
No, and
No.
so I think, it's like you asked this question, like, how is this serving me? And I think an important part is to understand that sometimes these things aren't serving us, and that doesn't
Oh,
make
yeah.
them bad. It's like to understand, hey, this victim part of me is this way for a reason. It's like they were hurt when they were younger
Hmm.
and they're trying to look out for me, but they might be doing it in a way that's no longer serving me.
Right. It's a survival
And
skill that's no longer
yeah,
appropriate in a non-survival, not
and
non-crisis
so
situation.
and having that discernment to say, I
Mm-hmm.
can recognize where this is coming from and I can love this part of me and understand why it's acting this way,
Mm-hmm.
and also recognize that it's no longer serving me and I don't need to follow its orders. That's that
Right.
discernment. And it's the difference between, this kind of, it's not aversion, it's being discerning and saying,
Okay.
yeah, like it's okay to say, like, hey, this isn't serving me and I don't want to go down this path. That's not aversion for a thing. That's just kind of
Right.
wisdom coming in and saying, hey, this is not helping me.
Well, that sounds more palatable. It's wisdom coming in instead of more aversion. Now I'll be on the lookout for aversion. Um, I want to switch gears just a little bit. I want to ask you your thoughts on, when we're those of us that are dealing with addictions, it doesn't really matter what kind, whether it's pornography or alcohol, drugs, shopping, whatever. There is sort of this level of guilt that it needs to be addressed and dealt with. Because I feel like I sort of live by this idea that we only allow into our lives what we believe we deserve on like the subconscious level. And you talk a lot about neuroplasticity, which is really about like rewiring the brain, relearning, um, all that stuff. But it's almost as if like the negativity, and we've been talking about acknowledging feelings that are challenging and things like that. Um, and I know you work with people and you have we didn't even talk about, we need to talk about the podcast and the work that you do. Don't let me forget that part. But how do you think of self-forgiveness after you've been wrestling with something that has felt, because I like when I was dealing with my addiction, I felt defeated. And then I internalized that as I am bad. And I felt like that was really a question that had to be resolved in a healthier way. How do you think of forgiveness in this process?
It's such a great question. There's a few things that come to mind. One is just kind of a reframing of, if a friend came to you with the exact same thing, would you tell that friend, hey, you're a bad person? And it's like, of course not. Of course, it would be like, hey, you messed up and you messed up big time, but you're not a bad person. Like, it's okay. Like, you owned up to it and you're working on improving yourself and you're lovable and you're worthy. It's like, so recognizing that for some reason we have this way of treating ourselves that we don't treat the people that we care about. I think another thing which I kind of talked about a little bit in there is like we also need to understand, like we talk a lot about shame in
Mm-hmm.
addiction recovery and how it's like, okay, we need to let go of shame. And that's true. And there's also healthy shame,
Right,
which
right.
is
Nobody
the
ever talks about
recognition.
healthy shame.
Yeah. And it's so funny. It's actually, we talk about it in Buddhism in this really cool way. So this is a little nerdy side note. In Buddhism, there, we are looking at, okay, what are the wholesome mental qualities we want to cultivate? And then what are the unwholesome mental qualities that we want to not cultivate? And all of the wholesome mental qualities that are good to cultivate, like contentment and compassion and resilience and equanimity and all these concentration, all of the wholesome mental qualities feel good. They're pleasant feelings. Like gratitude feels good. Contentment feels good. Except there's there's two exceptions. There's two mental qualities that are wholesome, meaning they're good to cultivate, they're good things, but they're unpleasant. It's these random two exceptions. And they're in Sanskrit, they're hiri and otapa. And what they mean is moral dread and moral shame. And it's like shame is actually these two qualities, they're called the two guardians of the world. And there are these two things that actually keep us from doing unskillful, they keep us from causing harm. Like shame is a really important thing. We like healthy shame, which is the feeling like, hey, if I do this thing that harms someone, I should feel ashamed of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a guardian quality. It actually protects us from harming ourselves and from harming other people.
Right.
So the two qualities, moral shame is one when you do something and you feel this shame. Moral dread is like the version of the feeling of fear before you do the bad thing.
Mm,
Like if I rob this person, oh my God, people are going to think I'm a bad person. That's moral dread. And that's
moral
also
dread.
wholesome. Yeah. And
That's
so it's like
wholesome.
I love this. this different phrasing. It's like, no, these are guardians of the world. They keep us from doing bad things.
What did you call it? Guardian qualities?
Just the guardians, yeah, like
The
their
guardians.
wholesome mental
Two
qualities.
wholesome guardians.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's beautiful, right? And it's like
That really is.
it,
I don't, in all the years, I don't think I've ever heard of this. This is new to me. This is
yeah,
like,
it's
I'm very
total
excited about this.
geeky
I love it.
Sanskrit, like
It's,
yeah. Uh,
it's
um,
geeky.
but it's really important for people to understand the different flavor of like, how do you know when it's toxic shame versus healthy shame, right?
Yeah, that's
Because
so good.
like toxic shame is one of the things that keeps us in addiction. And so
Right.
we
Yeah.
really do need to learn how to let go of toxic shame. Whereas healthy shame is the thing that keeps us from acting out again, where we're like, hey, if
Right.
I do that, that's not helpful and it's going to harm someone else. And I would be ashamed of that. Or
Right.
when we
Right.
do something bad and we look back and we're like, oof, that wasn't good. And I'm ashamed of that action.
Yeah.
That's a wholesome quality, that unpleasant feeling of remorse.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is like remorse. Like, oof,
Remorse.
yeah. I like remorse is beautiful. We need, right? But think about
Yeah.
it. It's
No,
the
you're
thing that
right.
kind of, it's like, oh gosh, that I was so out of line and it makes me feel sick to my stomach. And it's
Yeah.
unpleasant, but it's so important because that's what's keeping me on a path of integrity.
Okay, so this is very validating for me personally because when I work with women and they come to me and they tell me a story about something that they did, they feel horrible about it. I don't say, oh, it's okay. I say, you know what? Let that pain burn you a little bit because the next time you stand at the crossroads, and the only time my behavior has ever changed is when I've been able to be fully present in the moment, right? Because that's when you can make a different choice, right? I already know where that old road, like in the Matrix, you already know where that road leads. It's like, let that pain burn you a little bit because that's what's going to help you use it as leverage to make a different choice. Whether you wanted to call that guy again, whether you wanted to eat half that cake, or whether whatever, take that bong hit,
Hmm.
or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
The only time you can change is in the present moment. And it's so helpful to use that pain as leverage.
totally.
I think I have the title of the episode, Toxic Shame versus Healthy Shame.
Yeah.
you know,
It's such an important topic for people to know.
so
And just to
important.
say one thing about this is like another really important distinction between knowing is this toxic shame or healthy shame is toxic shame is kind of the underlying feeling of it is I did this bad thing, therefore I am a bad person. Whereas healthy
Yeah.
shame is I did this bad thing, but I'm still lovable. That's the difference. It's like, yeah, that action was unskillful and it caused harm, but it doesn't mean I am an unlovable person. So it's
Exactly.
the identification or the non-identification that keeps it being healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that idea of um, extrapolating a moral meaning about who we are after we make a mistake, which is I am bad. And so
Hmm.
the okay, that makes my neuroplasticity is plasticking. I am learning. Oh my God, this is so good. I could talk to you forever. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast because you have a really popular podcast already. You've been doing it for a year. Is that right?
Yeah, a little less
About a
than a
year,
year.
a little less than a year, and it's already super popular, the Unhooked podcast, because there are not a lot of podcasts out there that are talking about pornography addiction. And I would argue, listen, you're different. You're special. Like I really love the lens through which you are teaching, you know, how you see it differently and how you're helping people, not be afraid of the uncomfortable feelings. And really it's not about porn addiction. It's about well, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it's about everything that causes those, dysfunctions. So I mean, we've talked very little about pornography addiction. We're mostly talking about how to heal from it. So, and it's true. Everything that you have said has been true, applies to all other forms of, maladaptiveness. So
Yeah.
it's called the Unhooked podcast. What's the format of the podcast?
Yeah, so it's either myself in an interview, like a conversation like this, where I'm interviewing a guest expert, might be, a coach, gonna be having you on the podcast
I invited
soon.
myself
Yeah.
to be on
Yeah.
yours.
Scientists, experts, things like that.
Yeah.
And then occasionally also just solo episodes where I'm talking about a different concept, whether it's like toxic shame versus healthy shame or like the science of habit change. So it's just kind of my
Mm.
own, like, what are the things that are important for recovery?
When you do a solo episode, are those like, how long are those episodes?
They're usually about 15 to 20 minutes. So they're short.
Nice. Okay. I've been
Yeah.
hearing from people that it's nice to have like a bite size
Hmm.
episode in addition to long format.
Yeah. And those, it's just for the solo ones, I'm not the type of person that can just talk for an hour. So
Oh my
it's
Lord, have
it's like I'm
mercy.
just like straight to the
I mean,
point.
I can, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I
I can
haven't, I
talk
have.
in conversation for an hour, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
not by myself.
No, this has been so helpful. And tell me a little bit about the coaching that you do. People want to work with you one on one. How does that work?
Yeah, so I have one-on-one coaching as an offer, and if you're interested in that, just sign up for a discovery call on my website. We can link that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely. What's the name of it? Your website?
JeremyLipkowitz.com.
Oh, easy peasy.
Uh, Not so easy depending on
Oh,
people's comfort with my last name. Um,
it's not a porn, it's not porn addiction recovery.com.
no, Pornhub.com/recovery. Um,
Could you imagine the traffic that you would get?
I know. I actually tried advertising on Pornhub for a little while,
Oh,
but
really? How
didn't
did that
work.
go?
Yeah, didn't work.
Conflict of interest, maybe?
Well, Pornhub was fine with it. They were fine to take my money, but I guess when
Oh,
people are in the moment of engaging
yeah.
with that behavior, they're not really like, oh yeah, let me sign up for this guy's
That's like a nun at
recovery
a
program.
bar. Nobody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
Nobody wants that guilt
anyways,
trip.
yeah.
Okay,
So for,
so
for
but people
coaching, if people are
okay.
interested, they can just sign up for a discovery call and
How do you
um,
spell your last name?
Lipkowitz. So Jeremy and then
Okay.
Lipkowitz.com.
Yeah. I'll link it in the show notes. So if you're driving or don't have a
Yeah.
pen handy, you can just go to the o.chat.com
Yeah.
website and there'll be a link there.
Yeah. And then other than that, I have an online program called Unhooked Recovery, and that launches like 2 or 3 times a year. So right now there's a waiting list you can sign up for to
Nice.
get notified when we launch again.
Okay, and it's a group. So how many people at a time? Is it a large group or is it like how does that work?
Smaller group, yeah, kind of a bit more intimate, maybe 15 to 20 people.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like community is such a big part of recovery. It's really important. It's so helpful to have peer support and access to people, because as you know, I'm a coach myself. I'm not available 24/7, but your friends are.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
always harass your friends at all hours
Yeah.
of the day and night for free. So that's important too.
Yeah. And especially for this addiction around internet addiction or porn addiction, just knowing that you're not alone, like just being in a group where you see other people talking about it, that
Yeah.
alone is really healing.
Yeah. Is it predominantly men or are there women in there too?
In the program, it's a men's
A
only
men's
thing.
program.
Yeah, just for
Yeah.
now, it's there are definitely women who struggle with this addiction for sure. There's a lot of women who are addicted to porn. But there's something about men's work and having kind of a space for men that is just a little different, a little healing in that way.
Yeah, it is totally different. Yeah, I have women's groups, small women's groups that I support. So listen, between the both of us, we'll have everybody covered.
Yeah, yeah,
My goodness. Well, Jeremy, it was such a pleasure to be able to speak to you again today. Thank you so much. I learned so much today, which I really appreciate. Got some new little nuggets of wisdom. So just wanted to say thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing your heart and your wisdom and all your kindness with us, which is so important. And I'll look forward to harassing you on, on your podcast when I'm in the hot seat.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to come up with some hot seat questions just to let you
Yeah,
feel the
it'll be
burn.
fun. It'll be fun. Well, thank you so much. We'll talk again real soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.